The helicopter exploded 70 feet above the mountain ridge, and Evan Cole ran straight toward it. Most people would freeze, most would run the other way. But Evan had stopped being most people the day his wife's aircraft fell from the sky 10 years ago. And today, somebody was screaming inside that fireball, and he was the only one close enough to do anything about it. Before we go any further, if you want to see where this story goes, if you want to know whether he makes it out alive, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get back to the mountain. The wind hit like a fist. Snow whipped sideways across the slope, turning the world into a white roar. Evan shielded his face with one arm and kept moving, boots punching through knee-deep powder. His daughter's voice echoed in his head. "Dad, please don't go." But he'd already kissed her forehead, promised he'd be careful, and sent her to the neighbor's cabin before the storm turned deadly. He shouldn't have been out here at all. He'd been checking the trail markers near the ridge when the sky split open with a sound like thunder cracking bone. The helicopter had come in too low, rotors screaming against the wind, and then it just broke apart. Metal shrieked, fire bloomed orange against the gray clouds. The fuselage slammed into the rocks and tumbled, shedding pieces, until it wedged itself between two boulders barely 50 yards from where Evan stood. For 3 seconds, he didn't move. His body remembered what his mind tried to forget: the smell of burning fuel, the shape of twisted metal, the way fire consumes everything it touches. He'd sworn he'd never go near a crash site again. Not after Sarah. Then he heard the scream. It was raw, desperate, human. Evan's legs moved before his brain caught up. He sprinted across the uneven ground, slipping on ice, grabbing at rocks to steady himself. Heat rolled off the wreckage in waves. Smoke poured from the crumpled cockpit, black and choking. Flames licked up from the tail section, feeding on aviation fuel that leaked across the snow in dark rivers. He circled the wreck, scanning for a way in. The pilot's door hung open, twisted on broken hinges. Inside, through the smoke, he saw movement, a shape thrashing against a seatbelt, one arm reaching toward the shattered windshield. "Hold on!" Evan shouted, though the wind stole his voice. "I'm coming!" He pulled his jacket over his mouth and ducked inside. The heat was unbearable. Metal groaned and buckled around him. The woman strapped into the pilot's seat turned her head, and even through the blood and the smoke, Evan saw her eyes. Wide, terrified, locked on his. "Leave me," she gasped. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible over the roar of the flames. "It's going to blow. Just go." "Not a chance." Evan yanked a multi-tool from his belt and sawed at the seatbelt. The nylon resisted, melting from the heat. His hands shook. Sweat poured down his face. The fire crept closer, consuming the rear cabin, turning the helicopter into an oven. The woman grabbed his wrist. "I said leave me." Evan met her gaze. "And I said no." The seatbelt snapped. He hooked his arms under hers and dragged her backward, out of the seat, across the warped floor. She cried out. Her leg was caught on something, twisted at a bad angle. Evan didn't stop. He pulled harder, and whatever held her gave way with a sickening crunch. They tumbled out into the snow just as the fuel tank ignited. The explosion lifted them both off the ground and threw them 10 feet down the slope. Evan hit hard, rolled, and came up on his knees with his ears ringing and his lungs screaming for air. The woman lay beside him, unconscious, her face pale beneath streaks of blood and soot. He checked her pulse. Weak, but there. Her leg was definitely broken. Compound fracture, bone visible through torn fabric. Her left arm hung limp. Burns covered her neck and hands. She needed a hospital, and the nearest one was 40 miles away through a storm that had just grounded every aircraft in the region. Evan looked back at the burning wreck. Black smoke poured into the sky, a beacon that would bring search teams eventually, but not soon enough. The storm was only getting worse, temperature dropping fast, visibility near zero. He couldn't carry her 40 miles, but he could carry her 2. Evan stripped off his outer jacket and wrapped it around the woman's torso, then hoisted her onto his back in a fireman's carry. She groaned but didn't wake. Her weight settled across his shoulders, and he started walking. The wind fought him every step. Snow blinded him. His legs burned. His lungs ached. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other, counting steps, measuring progress in yards instead of miles. The ridge trail disappeared beneath fresh powder, but Evan had walked this mountain for 10 years. He knew it in his bones. 20 minutes later, the shape of his cabin emerged from the storm. Low roof, stone chimney, windows glowing faintly with the light he'd left on for his daughter. Relief flooded through him. He kicked the door open and carried the woman inside, lowering her carefully onto the couch near the fireplace. The warmth hit him like a wall. He gasped, coughed, tasted smoke and blood. His hand shook as he stripped off his gloves and checked the woman's vitals again. Pulse stronger now. Breathing steady. But the leg needed attention, and those burns needed treatment, and he had maybe an hour before shock set in. Evan grabbed the first aid kit from the kitchen and knelt beside the couch. He cut away her torn pants to expose the fracture, cleaned the wound as best he could, and stabilized the leg with a splint made from wooden dowels and duct tape. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. He dressed the burns on her neck and hands with antibiotic ointment and gauze, then wrapped her in blankets and elevated her injured leg on a stack of pillows. Only then did he let himself breathe. He sank into the chair across from her and pressed his palms against his eyes. His whole body trembled. Adrenaline drained away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Outside, the storm hammered against the cabin walls, rattling windows, howling down the chimney. Inside, the fire crackled softly. The woman slept. Evan studied her face. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s. Strong features, sharp jawline, dark hair matted with blood. Expensive flight suit, custom boots, high-end gear that didn't match the wreckage of the helicopter she'd been flying. Everything about her screamed money and access, which raised the question, what the hell was someone like her doing flying solo into a mountain storm in an aircraft that looked like it had been held together with prayers and spare parts? His gaze drifted to her left hand. No wedding ring. But there was a thin scar across her palm, old and faded, the kind you get from holding on to something sharp when you should have let go. The woman's eyes opened. Evan sat forward. Easy, don't move. You've got a broken leg and some burns. You're safe. She blinked slowly, focusing on him. Her pupils were uneven. Possible concussion. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. Where? My cabin. About 2 miles from the crash site. Storm's too heavy for evac. You're stuck here until it clears. The helicopter, gone. Burned. She closed her eyes. Her jaw tightened. The data recorder, also gone, I'd guess. But you're alive, and that's what matters. Her eyes snapped open again, and this time there was something sharp in them. Something calculating. You don't understand. That aircraft, there was evidence. Evidence of what? She hesitated. Her gaze swept the cabin, the worn furniture, the simple kitchen, the photos on the mantel, family photos. Evan and a little girl with dark braids and a gap-toothed smile. A wedding photo, edges faded, showing a younger Evan, and a woman with kind eyes and pilot's wings pinned to her jacket. The woman on the couch went very still. You're a pilot. Was, Evan corrected. Not anymore. But you were. You know aircraft. You know systems. She struggled to sit up again, and this time Evan helped her, propping pillows behind her back. She looked at him with an intensity that made him uneasy. What's your name? Evan Cole. Her face went pale. Cole, as in Sarah Cole. The room tilted. Evan's hands clenched into fists. How do you know my wife's name? The woman's breathing quickened. She stared at him like she'd seen a ghost. Because she died in one of our aircraft, 10 years ago, February 14th, Valentine's Day. The FAA blamed pilot error, but it wasn't. It was a defective stabilizer bracket, and my father's company buried the evidence to avoid a recall. Evan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The words hit him like bullets, each one tearing through the carefully constructed walls he'd built around Sarah's memory. What did you just say? My name is Lena Hart. My father is Richard Hart. Hart Aviation. We built the helicopter that killed your wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Evan stood slowly, his vision tunneled, his pulse hammered in his ears. You're lying. I'm not, Lena's voice broke. I've spent the last 3 years trying to prove it. I found the internal memos, the suppressed test data, the payoffs to the investigators. My father knew the stabilizers were failing, and he sold them anyway because a recall would have cost him millions. 63 aircraft, 41 crashes, 72 deaths. Your wife was number 18. Evan's legs gave out. He sank back into the chair, hands shaking, mind reeling. Sarah's face swam before him, laughing, radiant, alive. Then the call from the crash site, the closed casket, the FAA report that blamed her for a mechanical failure she couldn't have prevented. The guilt he'd carried for 10 years, wondering if he'd missed something, if he'd failed to maintain her aircraft properly, if he could have saved her. Why? Evan whispered. Why are you telling me this? Because I was trying to finish what she started. Lena's eyes filled with tears. I rebuilt one of the defective aircraft, identical specs. I was going to fly it into a controlled crash with cameras recording every second, prove the stabilizers failed exactly the way the engineers predicted. But I didn't account for the storm. I lost control too early. The crash wasn't controlled. The recorder's gone. And now, her voice cracked. Now I've got nothing. No proof, no justice. Just another failure my father will bury. Evan stared at her. At this woman who'd crawled into a death trap to vindicate his wife, who'd nearly died trying to expose the man who'd killed Sarah and 71 others. Who was Richard Hart's own daughter? Why? He asked again. Why would you go against your own father? Lena's smile was bitter. Because he's a monster, and I'm tired of being his accomplice. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the fire burned low. And between them, in the space where grief and rage and impossible hope tangled together, something shifted. Evan leaned forward. Tell me everything. Lena talked for over an hour. Her words came in waves, halting at first, then faster, like a dam finally breaking. She told Evan about growing up in her father's shadow, watching him build Hart Aviation into an empire while cutting every corner that profit allowed. She told him about the first crash she remembered, a news helicopter in Phoenix, pilot killed instantly, and how her father had smiled at dinner that night because the lawsuit settled for less than the insurance payout. She told him about finding the hidden files 3 years ago, engineering reports that documented stabilizer failures during testing, memos from her father ordering the data suppressed, emails to FAA officials offering campaign contributions in exchange for favorable rulings. A pattern of corruption so deep and so deliberate that it turned her stomach. I confronted him, Lena said. Her hands twisted the blanket. I showed him the evidence. I begged him to issue a recall. He laughed. He said I didn't understand how business worked. He said the crashes were statistical noise, acceptable losses, and if I ever spoke about it publicly, he'd destroy me. So you decided to prove it yourself. I didn't know what else to do. I'm a trained pilot. He made sure of that, said every Hart needed to understand the products we sold. So I used his own money to buy one of the defective helicopters from a salvage yard, rebuilt it to original specs, and planned a controlled flight into the mountains with every sensor I could rig recording data. If I could prove the stabilizer failed under stress, the FAA would have to reopen every case, including your wife's. Evan's throat tightened. You were going to crash on purpose. With parachutes and safety gear, yes, but the storm came in faster than the forecast predicted. I lost the tail rotor 30 seconds after takeoff. After that, it was just trying to stay alive long enough to land somewhere that wasn't a cliff. She looked at him. You saved my life. After everything my family took from you, you still ran into the fire. I didn't know who you were. Would it have mattered if you did? Evan wanted to say yes. Wanted to say he would have let her burn, that she deserved it, that blood paid for blood. But he thought of his daughter, asleep at the neighbor's cabin, and knew the truth. No, it wouldn't have. Lena's eyes shimmered. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but Sarah would have done the same thing. Evan stood and moved to the window, snow piled against the glass, the storm still raging. The recorder's really gone? It was bolted to the firewall near the tail. If the fuel tank went, it's slag. And without it, you've got nothing. Right. Evan turned to face her. What if you're wrong? About what? About the recorder being destroyed. Modern black boxes are built to survive fires, impacts, water. They're designed to be recoverable even in total loss scenarios. His mind raced, pulling up details from years of training, certifications, accident investigations he'd consulted on before Sarah's death. If the tail section broke off before the explosion, the recorder might still be intact. Hope flickered across Lena's face. You think we could find it? Maybe, if the storm breaks, if we can get back to the site before your father's people do. Evan crossed his arms. But I need to know something first. If we recover that data, if it proves everything you've said, what then? You ready to burn your whole life down? Lena didn't hesitate. I already tried to crash a helicopter to expose him. You think I'm worried about my trust fund? Despite everything, Evan almost smiled. Fair point. Besides, Lena added quietly, I owe your wife that much. I owe all of them. Evan looked at the photo on the mantel. Sarah smiled back at him, frozen in time, forever 32. He'd spent 10 years believing she'd made a mistake, that she'd pushed the aircraft too hard, that maybe if he'd been there, if he'd checked the systems one more time. Now he knew the truth. She hadn't failed. She'd been failed. And the man responsible was still building helicopters. All right, Evan said. When the storm clears, we go back. We find that recorder. And we make your father answer for what he's done. Lena nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go. The storm didn't break that night, or the next day. For 48 hours, the wind howled and the snow fell and the world outside the cabin disappeared into white chaos. Evan kept the fire burning, rationed the food, and monitored Lena's condition. The leg was stable, the burns were healing, but she needed real medical attention soon. His daughter, Mia, called on the satellite phone every few hours. She was safe with the Richardsons next door, helping Mrs. Richardson bake cookies and watching movies, but she missed him. Evan promised he'd come get her as soon as the roads cleared, told her he loved her, and hung up before she could ask too many questions about the woman he'd pulled from the fire. Lena slept most of the first day, her body fighting off shock and exhaustion. When she was awake, she and Evan talked, carefully at first, circling each other like wounded animals, then with growing honesty. She told him about growing up in boardrooms and country clubs, about the loneliness of being Richard Hart's only child, about the moment she realized her father valued profit over human life. Evan told her about Sarah, about their wedding in a tiny chapel in Montana, about the way she'd laughed when he proposed mid-flight at 10,000 feet, about the daughter she'd left behind, who had her eyes and her stubborn heart. He told her about the decade he'd spent on this mountain, raising Mia alone, avoiding anything that looked like the life he'd lost. You gave up flying, Lena said on the second evening. They sat near the fire, her leg propped up, both of them nursing mugs of coffee. Completely? Completely. Do you miss it? Evan stared into the flames. Every single day. Why don't you go back? Because every time I think about climbing into a cockpit, I see Sarah's helicopter falling from the sky. I see the crash site. I see the casket. He set his mug down. I can't trust the machines anymore. And I can't trust myself. Even though you know it wasn't your fault? Knowing something in your head and feeling it in your gut are two different things. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I understand that. I've known for 3 years that my father's company killed 72 people. But every time I write a check, every time I use the Hart name, every time I benefit from the money built on those deaths, I feel complicit, like I'm part of the machine. You're trying to stop it. Trying isn't enough. People are still dying. Evan looked at her. In the firelight, bruised and bandaged, she looked nothing like the corporate princess he'd imagined when she first said her father's name. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a crushing weight for far too long. Someone who'd finally decided to put it down, even if it meant breaking herself in the process. We'll get the recorder, Evan said, and we'll finish what you started. What if it's too late? What if my father's people already found it? What if, then we'll find another way. But we don't give up, not after coming this far. Lena smiled faintly. You sound like my flight instructor. She used to say the only time you've truly failed is when you stop trying. Smart woman. She died in a Hart aviation helicopter, 7 years ago. Stabilizer failure. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Evan reached out and gripped Lena's hand. She held on tight. Outside, the wind began to ease. By the third morning, the storm had passed. Evan woke to pale sunlight streaming through the windows and a silence so profound it felt like the world holding its breath. He checked on Lena, still asleep, breathing steady, then stepped outside into a landscape transformed. Snow covered everything, smooth and pristine, erasing the trails and landmarks he knew by heart. The sky stretched blue and infinite overhead. The air bit cold and clean, and somewhere out there, buried in the white, was the wreckage of a helicopter and the truth it carried. Evan went back inside and found Lena awake, struggling to sit up. Is it over? The storm? Yeah, but we've got maybe 6 hours before the road's clear enough for emergency services to reach the crash site. If we're going to beat them there, we need to move now. I can't walk on this leg. I know, I'll carry you. Evan, it's 2 miles through snow. I've done harder things. He grabbed his gear, ropes, tools, the avalanche beacon he kept for emergencies. You just focus on telling me where to dig once we find the tail section. Lena stared at him. Why are you doing this? Because Sarah deserves justice. Because 71 other people deserve justice. And because you risked everything to give it to them. He held out his hand. Now come on. We're burning daylight. She took his hand. But the trek back to the crash site was brutal. The snow had drifted deep in places, forcing Evan to wade through waist-high powder while carrying Lena on his back. His legs screamed. His lungs burned. Sweat soaked through his layers despite the cold. But he kept moving step by step, following the faint smoke stain on the horizon where the helicopter had burned. Lena directed him from over his shoulder, her voice steady, despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. Tail section would have separated on impact. Look for debris scattered east of the main wreck. That's downwind. They found the primary crash site first. The fuselage was a blackened skeleton, metal twisted into abstract shapes, snow melting in dark pools where heat still radiated from the wreckage. Evan's stomach turned. It looked exactly like Sarah's crash, exactly like the nightmares he'd been running from for a decade. Evan? Lena's hand on his shoulder. You okay? He swallowed hard. Yeah, let's keep moving. They circled east, scanning the slope. The snow had covered most of the debris, but here and there pieces of metal jutted through the white. A rotor blade, a section of landing gear, fragments of the cockpit canopy. Evan followed the scatter pattern, reading the crash like a story written in twisted aluminum and shattered composites. And then he saw it. 30 yards downslope, half buried in a snowdrift, the tail boom lay on its side. The vertical stabilizer was gone, sheared off during the impact, but the horizontal sections were still attached, and bolted to the firewall, protected by a bright orange housing, was the flight data recorder. There, Lena pointed. That's it. Evan lowered her carefully onto a rock and waded through the snow to the tail section. The recorder was mounted with 4 bolts, all of them stripped and fused from the heat. He pulled a wrench from his pack and started working them loose. The metal resisted, groaned, finally gave way. 1 bolt, 2, 3. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the valley. Evan's head snapped up. 3 aircraft approached from the south, flying low and fast, corporate livery visible even at a distance. Hart Aviation logos gleamed on their fuselages. They're here, Lena said. Her voice was tight. My father sent them. Evan yanked the 4th bolt free and ripped the recorder from its housing. The orange box was scorched but intact, its casing unbreached. He shoved it into his pack and hurried back to Lena. Can you hold on if I run? Do I have a choice? Not really. He pulled her onto his back and started moving, angling away from the crash site, heading for the tree line where the helicopters couldn't land. Behind them, the aircraft descended, rotors kicking up clouds of snow. Men in tactical gear poured out, spreading across the slope, searching the wreckage. One of them spotted Evan and Lena. He shouted. The others turned. Evan ran harder. His lungs screamed. His legs felt like lead. Lena's weight threatened to drag him down with every step. But he didn't stop, didn't slow, just focused on the trees ahead and the narrow trail that wound down the mountain toward the main road. They reached the tree line. The forest swallowed them, branches heavy with snow, shadows deep and concealing. Evan risked a glance back. The men were following, moving fast, coordinated like a military unit. But they were on foot now, and Evan knew these woods. He knew every trail, every shortcut, every place the mountain would hide them. "Hold on," he told Lena, and then he ran like his life depended on it. Because it did. They emerged from this forest an hour later, exhausted and frozen, to find Evan's truck parked where he'd left it 3 days ago. He loaded Lena into the passenger seat, fired up the engine, and drove. The roads were still treacherous, ice hidden under fresh snow, but Evan had been driving this mountain for 10 years. He knew where the grip was, where the danger lurked. Behind them, the helicopters lifted off, searching. But they were looking in the wrong direction, and by the time they realized their mistake, Evan and Lena were already halfway to town. Lena pulled the recorder from the pack and cradled it in her lap. "We did it. We actually did it." "Not yet," Evan said. "We still have to get the data analyzed, verified, submitted to the FAA. Your father's lawyers will fight this every step of the way." "Let them. I've got 3 years of evidence to back this up. Internal memos, engineering reports, financial records showing the bribes. This recorder is just the final piece." Evan glanced at her. "You're really going to do this? Testify against your own father?" "I have to. It's the only way to make this right." "It's going to destroy you, your family, your reputation, everything." Lena met his eyes. "Good. I want it destroyed. I want to burn it all down and build something better from the ashes." Evan almost believed her. They reached the sheriff's office just before noon. Evan carried Lena inside, past startled deputies, straight to Sheriff Carla Martinez's desk. Carla took one look at Lena's injuries and the orange box in Evan's hands and said, "What the hell happened up there?" "Evidence," Evan said, "of corporate manslaughter, FAA corruption, and 72 murders." Carla's eyes widened. "That's a hell of a claim, Cole. And we can prove it." Lena leaned forward. "But we need protection. My father's people are already here. They tried to stop us from recovering this recorder. They'll try again." "Who's your father?" "Richard Hart. Hart Aviation." Carla whistled low. "You're serious?" "Completely." The sheriff looked at Evan. He nodded. She sighed, picked up the phone, and started making calls. To the FBI, to the FAA, to the district attorney. Within 2 hours, federal agents had secured the recorder, taken Lena's statement, and placed both her and Evan under protective custody. Within 4 hours, news of the recovered flight data had leaked to the press. Within 6 hours, Richard Hart's attorneys had filed for an injunction to block the data's release, and within 8 hours, Evan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Hello?" "Mr. Cole." The voice was smooth, cultured, cold. "My name is Richard Hart. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Evan's hand tightened on the phone. "I don't think so." "My daughter. And a piece of equipment that was taken from my property without authorization. Your daughter's an adult making her own choices, and that equipment is evidence in a federal investigation." "Mr. Cole, I understand you lost your wife in an unfortunate accident 10 years ago. I'm truly sorry for that, but dredging up old tragedies won't bring her back. It will only cause more pain." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. My family has resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who will tie this case up for decades. Investigators who will examine every aspect of your life. I will bury you, Mr. Cole, and I will bury my daughter. All to protect a company that employs thousands of people and contributes billions to the economy. Those thousands of people deserve to work for a company that doesn't kill its customers. Crashes are a statistical inevitability in aviation. You know that. Not when they're caused by defects you knew about and covered up." Silence. Then quietly, "Lena told you that?" "She showed me the proof." "Then you're a fool. She's been obsessed with this conspiracy theory for years. She's mentally unstable, Mr. Cole. She needs help, not encouragement. She nearly died trying to prove you're a murderer. That doesn't sound unstable. That sounds brave." "Brave," Richard Hart laughed. "Is that what you call it? I call it a waste. She had everything, wealth, position, a future. and she threw it away for a crusade that will accomplish nothing except her own destruction. Maybe she thinks some things are worth more than money. Then she's even more naive than I thought. The warmth drained from Hart's voice. Let me be clear, Mr. Cole. If you continue down this path, I will ruin you. I will take your home, your reputation, custody of your daughter. I will make sure you never work again, never fly again, never know peace again. All you have to do is walk away. Evan looked through the window of the safe house where FBI agents had taken him and Lena. She sat on the couch, her broken leg elevated, talking on another phone to a lawyer. Even bruised and bandaged, even facing the destruction of her entire world, she looked determined, unbreakable. She looked like Sarah. No, Evan said. Excuse me? I said no, I'm not walking away. Neither is your daughter. And when this is over, when the truth comes out and the FAA reopens every case and the families get justice, you're going to prison, where you belong. You're making a mistake. I've made a lot of mistakes, Mr. Hart. This isn't one of them. Evan hung up. Across the room, Lena lowered her own phone and looked at him. That was him, wasn't it? My father. Yeah. What did he say? That he's going to destroy us. He'll try. I know. Evan sat down beside her. You sure you want to do this? There's still time to back out. Take a settlement, disappear, start over somewhere he can't find you. Lena shook her head. I'm done running. I'm done being afraid of him. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Evan thought about Sarah, about the decade he'd spent hiding on that mountain, raising Mia in isolation, afraid to live because living meant risking more loss. About the moment he'd run into the fire to save a stranger because it was the right thing to do. He thought about the recorder and the data it held, and the 72 names it would vindicate. Together, he agreed, and for the first time in 10 years, Evan Cole felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 72 hours of recovering the flight data recorder, 3 FBI field offices had opened coordinated cases against Hart Aviation. The recorder's data was damning. It showed the stabilizer bracket failing exactly as the suppressed engineering reports had predicted, the exact failure mode that had killed Sarah Cole and 71 others. Combined with the internal documents Lena had been collecting for 3 years, it painted a picture of systematic corporate negligence that made headline news across the country. Richard Hart's response was immediate and vicious. By the end of the first week, Evan found himself named as a defendant in 4 separate lawsuits. Hart Aviation claimed he'd trespassed on their property, stolen company equipment, and conspired with Lena to damage the corporation's reputation. The legal papers arrived at the safe house in thick manila envelopes, each one representing millions in potential damages. Evan sat at the kitchen table and read through them while an FBI agent named Torres made coffee and pretended not to notice the way his hands shook. They're trying to bankrupt you, Torres said finally. Make it too expensive to fight. I noticed. Evan set down the latest filing. How long can this go on? Depends on how deep Hart's pockets are. Could be months, could be years. I don't have years. I've got a daughter who needs her father home, not buried in depositions. Then maybe it's time to consider a settlement. Evan looked up sharply. You serious? Torres shrugged. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's reality. Hart Aviation employs 3,000 people. They've got political connections that go all the way to the Senate. The company's stock is already down 18%. If this drags on, it could tank completely. A lot of people will lose their jobs, their pensions, their livelihoods. The pressure to make this go away quietly is enormous. 72 people died because Richard Hart chose profit over safety. You want me to let him walk? I want you to survive this. There's a difference. Before Evan could respond, Lena came into the kitchen on crutches, her broken leg in a walking cast. She'd been on the phone with lawyers for most of the morning, and the exhaustion showed in the dark circles under her eyes. They just filed a motion to block my testimony, she said, claiming I'm mentally incompetent due to trauma from the crash. Evan stood. Can they do that? They can try. My father's lawyers are arguing that I suffered a traumatic brain injury in the crash, and therefore any statements I make are unreliable. They've got 3 psychiatrists ready to testify that I'm delusional. That's insane. That's my father. Lena lowered herself carefully into a chair. He's also frozen all my accounts, credit cards, bank access, trust fund, everything. I've got maybe $300 in cash and whatever I can borrow. Torres whistled. He's cutting you off completely. It's what he does. Control through money. He thinks if he makes me desperate enough, I'll come crawling back and recant everything. Evan leaned against the counter. Will you? Lena met his eyes. Would Sarah have? No, she would have fought until she couldn't fight anymore. Then that's your answer. Lena pulled a folder from her bag and spread documents across the table. I've been going through my father's personal files, the ones I copied before I left. There's something here I think we missed. Evan moved closer. The documents were financial records, spreadsheets showing payments made through shell corporations to various individuals over the past decade. Most of the names meant nothing to him, but Lena's fingers stopped on one entry. Here, Walter Benson, former FAA inspector. He received $200,000 3 months before the initial investigation into your wife's crash closed. Torres leaned over her shoulder. You're saying Hart bribed the inspector? I'm saying my father made a payment to the man who ruled Sarah's death pilot error, despite evidence of mechanical failure. You tell me what that looks like. It looks like we need to talk to Walter Benson. Evan pulled out his phone. Torres, can you get an address? Already on it. While Torres made calls, Lena continued sorting through the documents. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, organizing evidence with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for years. Evan watched her work and felt a grudging admiration. She'd been born into wealth and privilege, could have lived her entire life in comfortable denial, but instead she'd chosen this, chosen to burn down everything her family had built because it was the right thing to do. It reminded him of the choice he'd made 10 years ago, the day he'd decided to stop flying rather than risk another person's life on machines he couldn't trust. Different circumstances, same principle. Sometimes the only way to live with yourself is to walk away from everything you know. Except Lena wasn't walking away. She was walking straight into the fire. Found him, Torres announced. Walter Benson, retired FAA inspector living in Scottsdale, Arizona. No criminal record, but he's been called to testify in 3 separate aviation cases in the past 5 years. Always sides with the manufacturer. Convenient, Evan muttered. We need to talk to him, Lena said. Get him on record about the payment. Torres shook his head. That's a job for the FBI, not civilians under protective custody. Then you go talk to him. We will. But it takes time. We need warrants. We need to coordinate with the Phoenix field office. We need... Time we don't have, Lena interrupted. My father's lawyers are moving to dismiss this case within 2 weeks. If we don't have Benson's testimony before then, the whole investigation could collapse. I understand the urgency, Ms. Hart, but I can't just let you fly to Arizona on a hunch. It's not a hunch. It's evidence, and I'm going whether you authorize it or not. Torres looked at Evan. Talk some sense into her. Evan considered the situation. The FBI was thorough but slow, bound by procedures and protocols that Richard Hart's lawyers would exploit at every turn. They needed something that would break the case wide open, something undeniable. A bribed FAA inspector admitting on camera that he falsified Sarah's crash report would do exactly that. But it meant leaving protective custody. It meant exposing themselves to whatever resources Hart could bring to bear. It meant risk. Then again, everything worthwhile seemed to. I'll drive, Evan said. Torres threw up his hands. You're both out of your minds. Probably, Lena agreed, but we're going anyway. The agent stared at them for a long moment, then sighed. Fine, but you take 2 phones. One for you, one tracked by us. You check in every 4 hours, and if anything goes sideways, you call for backup immediately. Deal? Deal, Evan said. They left that afternoon. The drive to Scottsdale took 14 hours straight through. Evan drove while Lena navigated, her laptop balanced on her knees as she compiled more evidence from her father's files. They stopped only for gas and food, eating drive-through burgers while the highway unreeled beneath them, carrying them away from the mountains and toward the desert. Somewhere outside Flagstaff, as the sun set in bands of orange and gold, Lena closed her laptop and looked at Evan. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you doing this? Really? You could have handed the recorder to the FBI and walked away. Let them handle it. But instead you're driving across 2 states, risking lawsuits, and worse, for a woman you met less than a week ago. Evan kept his eyes on the road. You know why. Sarah. Partly, but also because I spent 10 years hiding from the world, convincing myself that keeping Mia safe meant keeping her isolated. Then you fell out of the sky and reminded me that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to fight for something bigger than yourself. That's a lot of weight to put on a helicopter crash. You started this fight 3 years ago. You built that aircraft knowing you might die. You were willing to sacrifice everything to prove your father killed those people. That takes a kind of courage I forgot existed. Lena was quiet for a moment. I was terrified the whole time, building the helicopter, planning the flight, climbing into the cockpit. I kept thinking maybe I should just take the evidence to a journalist, let someone else handle it. But then I'd remember my flight instructor, the one who died 7 years ago, and I'd know that if I didn't do this, if I didn't prove it beyond any doubt, my father would find a way to bury it. He always does. Not this time. How can you be so sure? Because you're still here, still fighting, and you've got 72 families who deserve the truth backing you up. That's not something even Richard Hart can bury. Lena smiled faintly. You sound like Sarah. She must have been remarkable. She was. She believed people were fundamentally good, that the world could be better if enough people chose to make it better. I thought I lost that belief when I lost her. Turns out I just misplaced it for a while. They drove on into the darkness, the highway a ribbon of light cutting through the night. Behind them, Evan's old life receded with every mile. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain, dangerous, but somehow more real than anything he'd felt in a decade. They reached Scottsdale just after dawn. Walter Benson lived in a retirement community on the edge of the city, one of those sprawling developments with golf courses and artificial lakes and homes that all looked vaguely similar. Evan parked across the street from Benson's address and studied the house. Single story, beige stucco, 2-car garage. A sprinkler system kept the lawn impossibly green despite the desert heat. How do you want to play this up? Evan asked. Lena pulled out her phone and started recording. Direct. We walk up, ring the doorbell, and ask him about the payment, see how he reacts. And if he slams the door in our faces? Then at least we tried. They crossed the street and rang the bell. Footsteps approached from inside, slow and shuffling. The door opened to reveal a man in his early 70s, gray hair thinning, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He looked at them with polite confusion. Can I help you? Walter Benson? Lena asked. That's right. My name is Lena Hart. This is Evan Cole. We'd like to talk to you about a payment you received from Hart Aviation 10 years ago. Benson's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. I don't know what you're talking about. $200,000? Paid 3 months before you signed off on the investigation into Sarah Cole's crash. The one you ruled pilot error despite evidence of mechanical failure. The color drained from Benson's face. I think you should leave. Mr. Benson, I have documentation of the payment, bank records, Shell Corporation filings, emails between you and my father arranging the transaction. If you talk to us now, cooperate with the FBI investigation. Maybe we can work something out, but if you don't... I said leave. Benson started to close the door. Evan caught it with his hand. My wife died in that crash. You blamed her for a defect you knew existed. You took money to lie about what killed her, so no, Mr. Benson. We're not leaving until you answer our questions. Benson stared at him. Something in the old man's face crumbled. Not fear, but shame. Deep, corrosive shame that had been eating at him for years. His shoulders sagged. You don't understand the pressure. Hart Aviation was the biggest manufacturer in the region. If I'd ruled against them, if I'd forced a recall, thousands of jobs would have been lost. The economy... 72 people died, Evan said quietly. Because you took a bribe and covered up a deadly defect. That's not economic policy. That's murder. Benson's hands shook. I never thought... I didn't realize how many... But you knew something was wrong. You knew the stabilizer failed, and you signed a report saying it was pilot error anyway. The old man's face twisted. It was supposed to be one time. just that one investigation. Richard Hart promised me it was an isolated incident, that they'd fix the problem quietly, that no one else would get hurt. He said if I went public, it would destroy the company for nothing. So I took the money, and I signed the report, and I told myself it was for the greater good. Tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. And then the crashes kept happening, and I kept quiet. Right? God help me. I kept quiet. Lena's phone was still recording. Mr. Benson, are you willing to testify to this? Officially? In court? He looked at her for a long moment. You're his daughter. Yes. Why are you doing this to your own father? Because it's the truth. And because those 72 people deserve justice more than he deserves protection. Benson wiped his eyes. I'm 73 years old. I've got maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky. I've spent the last decade living with what I did, and it's eaten me alive. So, yes, I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Maybe it won't make up for what I've done, but at least I can stop being part of the lie. Evan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you. They spent the next 2 hours at Benson's kitchen table, recording his statement, documenting every detail of his interactions with Richard Hart. The old inspector talked haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, as if the words had been building pressure for years. He described the phone calls, the meetings in airport hotels, the envelope full of cash that arrived with the wire transfer. He described the engineering reports he'd been shown, the evidence of stabilizer failures he'd been told to ignore. And he described the moment, 3 years after Sarah's crash, when he'd seen the news about another Hart Aviation helicopter going down and realized he'd helped kill again. I wanted to come forward, Benson said. I called the FBI hotline twice, but every time I got close to actually doing it, Hart's people would show up. Never threatening, always friendly, just reminding me about my pension, my grandkids' college funds, the comfortable retirement I'd earned, reminding me that telling the truth would cost me everything. But you're willing to tell it now, Lena said. What choice do I have? You've got the evidence. The FBI's already investigating. Hart Aviation stock is tanking. The truth's coming out whether I help or not. At least this way I can tell it myself, on my own terms, instead of having it dragged out of me in court. Evan understood. Benson wasn't a hero. He was a coward trying to find redemption, but sometimes cowards could still do the right thing, even if it took them years to work up the courage. They left Scottsdale that evening with Benson's statement, his promise to cooperate with federal investigators, and a signed affidavit that corroborated everything Lena had uncovered. It was enough to crack the case wide open, enough to destroy Richard Hart's defense, enough to force the FAA to reopen every investigation, to make the families whole, to ensure that Sarah's name was finally cleared. On the drive back, somewhere in the darkness between Phoenix and Flagstaff, Lena started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that tracked down her face while she stared out the window at the desert night. Evan didn't ask why. He just reached over and took her hand, and she held on tight. They returned to find the safe house surrounded by news vans. Somehow word had leaked about their trip to Arizona, about Benson's testimony, about the smoking gun that would bring down Hart Aviation. Reporters shouted questions as Evan drove past, cameras flashing. Torres met them at the door, looking equal parts relieved and furious. You were supposed to check in every 4 hours, he said. We were busy, Lena replied. Busy making my job 10 times harder. Do you have any idea the kind of attention you've attracted? Hart's lawyers are calling this a conspiracy. They're claiming you coerced Benson's testimony. We recorded everything, Evan said, handing over Lena's phone. He was lucid, willing, and eager to confess. Watch the video. You'll see. Torres took the phone and disappeared into another room. Evan and Lena sat in the kitchen, too exhausted to do anything but drink coffee and wait. Outside, the reporters continued their vigil, hungry for any scrap of information about the scandal that was consuming one of the nation's largest aviation manufacturers. An hour later, Torres returned. The recording's solid. Benson's already been contacted by our Phoenix office. He's confirmed everything. We've got enough to charge Richard Hart with conspiracy, bribery of federal officials, and obstruction of justice. The FAA is opening formal investigations into all 72 crashes. Congress is calling for hearings. So it's over. Lena said softly. The investigation's just beginning. But the cover-up? Yeah, that's done. Evan felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Sarah's name would be cleared. The families would get justice, and Richard Hart would finally face consequences for the lives he'd destroyed in pursuit of profit. But there was still one thing left to do. I need to go home, Evan said. I need to see my daughter. Torres nodded. We can arrange transport back to Montana, but you're still under protective watch until we're sure Hart isn't going to retaliate. Fair enough. Evan looked at Lena. You coming? She hesitated. I should stay here. Help the investigators. Give more testimony. You should see mountains that aren't trying to kill you. Meet the kid whose father you indirectly saved by keeping him from spending the rest of his life buried in guilt. Maybe have a meal that isn't takeout from a safe house kitchen. Lena smiled despite herself. When you put it that way. They flew back to Montana 2 days later on a federal transport. The sight of the mountains from the air made Evan's chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something like homecoming. He'd left this place a week ago believing his life was small and finished, that the best he could hope for was to keep his head down and his daughter safe, and nothing more. Now he was returning with purpose, with a fight worth fighting, with the knowledge that hiding from the world wasn't the same as protecting it. Mia met them at the sheriff's office, having been retrieved from the Richardsons by Deputy Chen. She launched herself at Evan the moment he walked through the door, wrapping her arms around his waist and refusing to let go. You were gone forever, she accused, her voice muffled against his jacket. I know, sweetie. I'm sorry. Mrs. Richardson said you were helping someone important. Is that her? Mia pointed at Lena, who stood awkwardly by the door on her crutches. Yeah, Mia, this is Lena. She's the woman I pulled from the helicopter crash. Mia studied Lena with the frank assessment only children could manage. You broke your leg. I did, Lena confirmed. Does it hurt? Sometimes. My dad's good at fixing things. He fixed my bike when the chain broke and my dollhouse when the roof fell off, and one time he fixed our neighbor's truck, even though he said he didn't know anything about trucks. Lena's smile was genuine. He sounds pretty capable. He is. He's the best dad ever. Mia looked up at Evan. Are we going home now? Soon. I just need to finish some things here first. Important things? Very important. Okay. But can Lena come to dinner? Mrs. Richardson made too much lasagna, and Dad, you always say it's rude not to share food. Evan looked at Lena, who looked both touched and uncertain. I wouldn't want to impose. You wouldn't be, Evan said. Besides, Mia's right. Mrs. Richardson always makes too much lasagna. So they went to dinner at the Richardsons' house, a warm and chaotic affair with too much food and too many questions, and Mia chattering nonstop about everything that had happened while Evan was gone. Lena sat between them, gradually relaxing as the evening wore on, laughing at Mia's stories and answering her questions about helicopters and cities and what it was like to have $1 billion. I don't actually have $1 billion, Lena clarified. My father does. I just had access to some of it. Past tense. Because you're fighting him in court, Mia said matter-of-factly. Deputy Chen told Mrs. Richardson who told me. He said you're very brave. Deputy Chen talks too much, Evan muttered. It's okay, Lena said. And I don't know if I'm brave. Mostly I'm just tired of lying. Mia nodded seriously. My dad says the truth is always better, even if it's hard. Is that true? I think so. At least I hope so. After dinner, after Mia had fallen asleep on the Richardsons' couch and been carried gently to their guest room, Evan and Lena stood on the porch watching the stars emerge over the mountains. The night was clear and cold, the kind of Montana evening that made the sky feel infinite. Thank you for this, Lena said quietly. I haven't had a normal evening in years. I'd forgotten what it felt like. You're welcome, though I should warn you, Mia's already planning your next visit. She mentioned something about teaching you to fish. I'd like that if, Lena hesitated, if there is a next visit. Once the trial's over, once I testify, I don't know where I'll end up. My father will make sure I'm blacklisted from every industry he has connections to. I'll probably have to start over completely, New name, new city, new life. You could stay here. The words surprised them both. Lena turned to look at him. What? Montana. These mountains. This town needs people who aren't afraid to tell the truth. And Evan met her eyes. I could use someone around who understands what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. Evan, I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just saying there's room here. For someone like you, if you want it. Lena studied his face for a long moment. You barely know me. I know you flew into a mountain to prove a truth no one wanted to hear. I know you gave up everything to get justice for people you never met. I know my daughter likes you, and Mia's a pretty good judge of character. He paused. And I know Sarah would have liked you too. Tears shimmered in Lena's eyes. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Then you've been talking to the wrong people. She laughed, a sound caught between joy and sorrow. Maybe I have. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and the mountains and the future taking shape in the space between what was and what might be. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. Richard Hart's lawyers would launch new attacks, the media would scrutinize every detail, and the long machinery of justice would grind forward. But tonight, for just a moment, there was peace. And sometimes, Evan thought, peace was enough. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Evan woke on the 4th morning to find Sheriff Martinez at his door, her expression grim. Behind her stood 2 federal agents he didn't recognize and a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Evan's truck. Mr. Cole, Martinez said, these gentlemen need to speak with you. Evan stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him to keep Mia from overhearing. What's going on? The man with the briefcase spoke first. My name is Marcus Webb. I represent Hart Aviation's insurance carriers. We've become aware that certain parties may be planning additional actions that could endanger lives and property. We're here to ensure that doesn't happen. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Webb pulled a tablet from his briefcase and turned it toward Evan. The screen showed security footage of a small private airfield somewhere in the desert. The timestamp read 2 days ago. In the video, Lena stood beside a helicopter, not one of the sleek corporate models Hart Aviation manufactured, but something older, more basic. She was examining the rotor assembly with a mechanic. Evan's stomach dropped. Where did you get this? Ms. Hart has been conducting unauthorized inspections of Hart Aviation aircraft currently in service. She's accessed hangars, examined maintenance records, and according to our sources, she's planning something catastrophic. She's trying to prove your aircraft are still defective. She's trying to manufacture evidence by sabotaging perfectly safe helicopters. Webb's voice hardened. Mr. Cole, Lena Hart is mentally unstable. The crash she survived has clearly traumatized her to the point of delusion. She needs psychiatric help, not encouragement. And if you continue to enable her behavior, you'll be held legally responsible for any damage she causes. One of the federal agents stepped forward. We've been authorized to take Ms. Hart into protective custody for psychological evaluation. Do you know her current location? Evan looked at Sheriff Martinez. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Carla? I'm sorry, Evan. The order came from federal court. Judge ruled there's sufficient evidence to suggest she's a danger to herself and others. That's insane. Richard Hart bought that ruling. Maybe, Martinez said quietly, but it's still in order. If you know where she is, you need to tell us. Evan thought about the conversation he'd had with Lena the night before. She'd been restless, talking about all the aircraft still flying with potentially defective parts, about the families who didn't know they were at risk every time they took to the air. She'd mentioned wanting to conduct more inspections, to gather irrefutable proof that the problem wasn't isolated to the crashes that had already occurred. He told her to be careful. He should have told her to stop. I don't know where she is, Evan said. It wasn't quite a lie. He didn't know her exact location. He just knew she'd rented a car and driven south yesterday morning, saying she'd be back in a few days. Webb studied him. If you're lying to protect her, you're making a serious mistake. Hart Aviation is prepared to offer you a substantial settlement. Enough to pay off your legal fees, set up a trust fund for your daughter, ensure your financial security for life. All you have to do is step away from this crusade and let Ms. Hart get the help she needs. Help? Is that what you call locking someone up to silence them? I call it preventing a tragedy. She's already tried to crash one helicopter. What makes you think she won't try again, but this time with innocent people aboard? Evan felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. Lena Hart is the bravest person I've ever met. She risked everything to expose your company's corruption. And now you want to lock her away because she won't stop fighting for the truth. The truth, Webb said coldly, is that Hart Aviation employs 3,000 people whose livelihoods depend on maintaining public confidence in our aircraft. Ms. Hart's vendetta is costing jobs, destroying families, and damaging an industry that keeps this nation moving. So yes, Mr. Cole, we're going to stop her, with your cooperation or without it. The agents moved toward Evan. He stood his ground. You can't just take someone against their will without cause. We have cause. A federal judge agreed. Now step aside. Sheriff Martinez put a hand on Evan's arm. Don't make this worse. But before anyone could move, Evan's phone rang. He pulled it from his pocket and saw Lena's number. His hand hesitated over the answer button. If he picked up with these people standing here, they'd trace the call, find her location. But if he didn't answer, she'd have no warning that they were coming for her. He answered and walked back into his house, slamming the door behind him. Through the wood, he could hear Webb shouting, the agents demanding entry. He had maybe 30 seconds before they came through. Lena, where are you? Evan? Her voice was breathless, excited. I found something. There's a maintenance facility in New Mexico that services Hart Aviation helicopters for the Border Patrol contract. I got access to their records, and Evan, half the aircraft in their fleet are overdue for stabilizer inspections. Some haven't been checked in over 2 years. The parts are failing, and nobody's catching it because Hart's maintenance guidelines don't require frequent enough inspections. Lena, listen to me. Hart's people are here. They have a court order to take you into psychiatric custody. They're claiming you're dangerous. Silence. Then quietly, of course they are. You need to disappear, right now. Ditch the rental car, use cash, don't go anywhere they'd expect. I can't run. Not when I'm this close. Evan, if I can get these maintenance records to the FAA, if I can prove Hart Aviation is knowingly operating defective aircraft, it's over. They can't spin this as old history or isolated incidents. This is happening right now. The front door splintered. The agents were coming through. Evan moved to his bedroom and locked that door too, buying seconds. Where exactly are you? Albuquerque. The facility is called Southwest Aviation Services. I'm meeting with a mechanic tonight who's willing to talk on record about the inspection issues. Send me the address. I'm coming to you. Evan, no. You've got Mia. You can't just... The Richardsons will watch her. I'll be there in 8 hours. Don't do anything until I arrive. Promise me. Evan, promise me, Lena. He heard her breath catch. I promise. Good. Stay safe. I'll call when I'm close. He hung up as the bedroom door crashed open. The agents grabbed him, pulled his arms behind his back, started searching his pockets. Webb stood in the doorway, his expression triumphant. That was foolish, Mr. Cole. Now you're officially obstructing a federal investigation. Arrest me then. See how that looks on the news. Widower jailed for helping woman expose corporate corruption. I'm sure it'll play great. Webb's jaw tightened. Where is she? I don't know. She didn't say. One of the agents held up Evan's phone. We can trace the call. Good luck. Lena's smarter than that. She's probably already ditched the phone and switched locations. Evan met Webb's eyes. You're not going to find her, and even if you do, even if you lock her up and silence her, the truth's already out. Benson testified. The flight recorder data has been analyzed. The FAA's investigating. You can't put this back in the box. We can make it go away quietly. A few more months of legal maneuvering, some strategic settlements, careful PR management. Hart Aviation will survive this. Ms. Hart won't. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. She's made powerful enemies, Mr. Cole. People who have resources you can't imagine. And she's alone, unstable, running out of money and options. How long do you think she'll last? Evan yanked his arms free from the agent's grip. A lot longer than you think. Because she's not alone. And she's not unstable. She's just finished playing by your rules. Webb studied him for a long moment. You're in love with her. The words hit Evan like a slap. He opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. Was he in love with Lena? He barely knew her. They'd spent less than 2 weeks together, but he thought about the way she'd looked at him in the burning helicopter wreckage, the determination in her eyes when she talked about justice, the quiet strength she showed even when her whole world was crumbling around her. He thought about how Mia had taken to her immediately, how Sarah would have liked her, how for the first time in 10 years he felt like he was living instead of just surviving. What I feel doesn't matter, Evan said finally. What matters is that she's right. Your company killed 72 people and tried to cover it up. That's not going away just because you intimidate witnesses and buy judges. Then I guess we'll see you in court. Webb turned to the agents. Let him go. We're done here. They filed out, leaving Evan standing in his wrecked bedroom with his daughter crying in the doorway and Sheriff Martinez looking at him with something like pity. You're making a mistake, Martinez said. Probably, but it's mine to make. She nodded slowly. I'll give you a head start. But Evan, once you leave, I can't protect you. Hart's lawyers will come after you with everything they've got. I know. And you're going anyway. Yeah, I am. Martinez pulled off her badge and set it on the dresser. Then this conversation never happened. You've got 2 hours before I have to report that you fled jurisdiction. Make them count. Evan packed a bag in 10 minutes. He explained to Mia that he had to help Lena with something important, that Mrs. Richardson would take care of her, that he'd be back as soon as he could. She didn't cry this time. She just hugged him tight and whispered, Be careful, Daddy. I will, sweetheart. I promise. He drove south through the mountains as the sun climbed higher, pushing his truck as fast as the roads would allow. Somewhere behind him, federal agents were probably getting warrants, tracing credit cards, setting up roadblocks. But Evan had spent 10 years learning every back road and forgotten highway in these mountains. He knew how to disappear. 8 hours later, as twilight painted the New Mexico desert in shades of purple and gold, Evan pulled into the parking lot of Southwest Aviation Services. The facility was small, just a few hangars and an office building surrounded by chain-link fence. Through the fence, he could see helicopters in various states of maintenance, their rotors removed or engines exposed. And standing beside a hangar door talking to a man in coveralls was Lena. Evan's chest tightened with relief. She was alive. She was safe. For now. He climbed out of the truck and approached the fence. Lena saw him, and her face lit up in a way that made something warm bloom in his chest. She said something to the mechanic, then jogged over to the gate. You came, she said. I said I would. I know, but... She gestured at the facility. I thought you'd send someone else. An FBI agent or a lawyer or someone official. I didn't think you'd actually drive 800 miles yourself. Mia thinks you're teaching her to fish next month. I couldn't let Hart's goons drag you off to a psych ward before that happens. Lena laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still have to get you out of here before they track you down. Evan nodded toward the mechanic. Is he the one with the information? Yeah, his name's Carlos Martinez. He's worked here for 15 years, and he's willing to testify that Hart Aviation's maintenance protocols are criminally inadequate. He's got documentation showing aircraft that should have been grounded still flying border patrol missions with passengers aboard. That's huge. It's bigger than huge. It's proof that this isn't just about old crashes. People are at risk right now, today, because Hart Aviation values contracts over safety. Lena's voice shook with anger. My father knows. He has to know. And he's letting it continue, because grounding the fleet would cost him the Border Patrol contract. Evan thought about the 72 people already dead, about Sarah, about all the families who'd been told their loved ones died because of pilot error when the truth was corporate negligence. And now Lena was telling him more people were at risk, flying an aircraft that could fail at any moment. We need to get Carlos somewhere safe, Evan said. Somewhere Hart's people can't reach him. Already arranged. FBI's sending a team to pick him up tonight. They'll take his statement, secure the maintenance records, and start proceedings to ground Hart Aviation's entire fleet pending safety inspections. When did you arrange all this? This afternoon. I've been on the phone with Agent Torres for hours. He's not happy about the psychiatric custody order, but his hands are tied. Best he can do is make sure Carlos's testimony gets on record before Hart's lawyers shut everything down. Evan looked at her. This woman who'd lost everything, who was being hunted by her own father's hired guns, who could have run to another country and started over in anonymity. Instead, she was standing in a desert airfield at sunset, fighting to save people she'd never meet. "You're incredible," he said. Lena blinked. "What?" "I mean it. What you're doing, what you've been doing for 3 years, it's remarkable. Sarah would have been proud to know you." She looked away, but not before he saw the emotion in her eyes. "I'm just trying to make things right. You're doing a hell of a lot more than that." Before Lena could respond, Carlos called out from the hangar, "Ms. Hart, you should see this." They crossed the tarmac to where the mechanic stood beside a disassembled helicopter. The aircraft's stabilizer assembly lay on a work table, the metal components spread out like an autopsy. Carlos pointed to a bracket that connected the rotor mast to the airframe. "This is what I was telling you about," he said. "See these stress fractures? This bracket should have been replaced 6 months ago, but Hart Aviation's maintenance schedule only calls for visual inspection every 18 months. By the time we'd catch something like this through visual inspection alone, the bracket could fail catastrophically." Lena leaned closer, her pilot's training evident in the way she examined the part. "This is the same defect that caused my crash, the same one that killed Sarah Cole. It's the same defect that's probably in half the Hart Aviation helicopters currently in service. I've been documenting it for years, reporting it to my supervisors, begging them to flag it for the manufacturer. But Hart Aviation keeps telling us it's within acceptable tolerances, that the brackets are designed to show some stress, that we're being overly cautious." "They're lying to protect their contract," Evan said. "I know. That's why I'm willing to testify. I can't keep watching aircraft go out knowing they might kill someone." Carlos's hands shook as he touched the fractured bracket. "My daughter flies Border Patrol. She could be in one of these helicopters tomorrow. I won't let that happen." Lena pulled out her phone and started taking photos, documenting every angle of the defective part. "Agent Torres needs to see this. Can we take the bracket as evidence?" "It's already bagged for the FBI. They're supposed to arrive." The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the evening air. All 3 of them looked up. A sleek corporate helicopter appeared over the ridge, flying low and fast, Hart Aviation logo bright against the darkening sky. It circled the facility once, then began descending toward the tarmac. "They found us," Lena whispered. Evan grabbed her arm. "We need to go, now!" But before they could move, 2 more helicopters appeared, flanking the first. They landed in formation, blocking the exits, their rotors still spinning. Doors opened and men in suits poured out, moving with military precision. And from the center helicopter, moving with the confidence of someone who owned the world, stepped Richard Hart. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed despite the desert heat. Everything about him radiated power and control. He looked at the facility, at Carlos cowering by the hangar, at Evan standing protectively in front of Lena. And then he smiled. "Hello, sweetheart," he said to Lena. "It's time to come home." Lena's hand found Evan's and held on tight. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "I'm afraid you don't have a choice. I have a court order authorizing your psychiatric detention. These gentlemen are licensed medical professionals prepared to ensure you receive appropriate care." Richard gestured to the men surrounding them. "Please don't make this difficult." "Difficult?" Lena's voice shook with rage. "You killed 72 people. You bribed federal inspectors. You're knowingly operating defective aircraft that could crash at any moment. And you think I'm the one who needs psychiatric care? I think you've had a traumatic experience that's clouded your judgment. I think you're surrounding yourself with people who are exploiting your vulnerability for their own purposes." Richard's gaze shifted to Evan. "People like Mr. Cole, who seems to have developed an unhealthy fixation on my daughter." Evan stepped forward. "Your daughter is a hero. She's risking everything to stop you from killing more people. That's not mental illness. That's integrity." "Is that what you call it?" "I call it a daughter so desperate for her father's attention that she'll burn down his life's work just to hurt him." Richard's smile never wavered. "But I'm a forgiving man. Lena, if you come with me now, if you recant your testimony and issue a public statement explaining that you were confused and traumatized, I'll drop all charges against Mr. Cole. I'll even set up a generous trust fund for his daughter. All you have to do is stop this nonsense." Stop trying to save lives, you mean. Stop trying to destroy a company that provides jobs for thousands of people. Stop damaging an industry that's essential to this nation's economy. Stop embarrassing your family. Richard's voice hardened. I gave you everything, Lena. Education, opportunities, wealth beyond most people's dreams. And this is how you repay me? By siding with strangers against your own blood? You're not my blood. You're a murderer who happens to share my DNA. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and dangerous beneath the paternal concern. Then it was back, smooth as glass. I see. Then I suppose we have nothing left to discuss. He nodded to his men. Take her. They moved forward. Evan pushed Lena behind him, but there were too many of them, professional and efficient. Carlos shouted something about calling the police. One of Hart's men grabbed Evan's arm and twisted it behind his back with practiced ease. Another reached for Lena. And then the FBI arrived. 3 black SUVs roared into the facility, lights flashing, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. Agent Torres was in the lead, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Federal agents! Nobody move! Hart's men froze. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, reassessment. Torres approached with his badge held high. Richard Hart, I'm Special Agent Torres with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, bribery of federal officials, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Agent Torres. I also know that warrant won't survive the first court challenge. My lawyers will have it dismissed by morning. Maybe, but you'll spend tonight in federal custody explaining to a judge why you're here threatening witnesses in an active investigation. I'm here retrieving my mentally ill daughter before she hurts herself or others. No, sir, you're here attempting to obstruct justice. Ms. Hart is a material witness under federal protection. Any attempt to detain her against her will constitutes witness tampering. Torres gestured to his agents. Take him. Evan felt Hart's man release his arm. He moved immediately to Lena's side as FBI agents swarmed Richard Hart, reading him his rights, placing him in handcuffs. The corporate titan's composure finally cracked, just a little, as steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. This isn't over, Richard said, looking directly at Lena. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. I will fight this with every resource I have. I will tie this investigation up in courts for years. And when it's finally over, when you've exhausted yourself fighting me, you'll have nothing left. No family, no money, no future. Was it worth it? Lena met her father's eyes without flinching. Ask me again when you're in prison. They led Richard Hart away. His helicopters sat abandoned on the tarmac, their pilots detained for questioning. Carlos gave his statement to federal agents while technicians photographed the defective stabilizer bracket. And Evan and Lena stood together in the gathering darkness, watching the man who'd caused so much death and suffering finally face consequences. It's really happening, Lena said quietly. He's really going to trial. Yeah, it is. I thought I'd feel different, triumphant or vindicated or something, but I just feel exhausted. Yeah. Evan put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, and they stood like that for a long time, 2 people who'd fought their way through fire and found something worth keeping on the other side. Torres approached as his team finished processing the scene. Ms. Hart, Mr. Cole, we need to get you both into protective custody. Hart Aviation's going to come apart fast now, and there are a lot of people who won't be happy about it. You'll be safer in a secure location until after the trial. How long? Evan asked. Could be months. Hart's lawyers will drag this out as long as possible. Evan thought about Mia waiting for him back in Montana, about his cabin in the mountains and the quiet life he'd built, about walking away from all of this and pretending he'd never met Lena Hart. Then he thought about Sarah and the 71 others who'd died, and the people still flying in defective aircraft who didn't know they were at risk. Then I guess we'd better get comfortable, he said. Lena looked up at him. You don't have to do this. You've already done more than anyone could ask. I know, but I'm not walking away. Not now, not from you. Her breath caught. Evan. Before she could finish, one of Torres's agents came running from the hangar, her face pale. Sir, we've got a problem. there's been a crash. Border Patrol helicopter went down 30 miles north of here. Hart Aviation model. They're saying the stabilizer failed mid-flight." The world seemed to stop. Torres grabbed his radio, already barking orders. Carlos made a sound like he'd been punched, and Lena's face went white as she whispered the question everyone was thinking. "Survivors?" "Unknown. Search and rescue's en route now, but it's rough terrain and it's getting dark." Evan felt Lena stiffen beside him. He knew what she was thinking because he was thinking it too. Another crash. More deaths. More families destroyed because Richard Hart had valued profit over human life. And this time, they'd been so close to stopping it, hours away from grounding the fleet. But close didn't save lives. "I'm going," Lena said suddenly. "To the crash site. I can help with the search." "Ms. Hart, you're injured and exhausted. The professionals will handle it." "I'm a trained pilot. I know these aircraft inside and out. If there are survivors, if the helicopter's in a position where extraction is difficult, I can advise the rescue team." Her voice gained strength. "I have to go. I have to try to save whoever's still alive." Torres looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Lena's expression stopped him. He turned to Evan. "What about you?" Evan thought about the last time he'd been near a helicopter crash site. The flames, the twisted metal, the smell of burning fuel. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to let the professionals handle it, to protect himself from the memories that would come flooding back. But he looked at Lena, at the determination in her eyes, at her desperate need to salvage something good from this nightmare. And he remembered what he told her back in his cabin, that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to fight for something bigger than yourself. "I'm going too," he said. "Let's go save some lives." They flew to the crash site in an FBI helicopter, the irony not lost on Evan as he strapped himself into a seat for the first time in a decade. His hands shook as he fastened the harness, muscle memory warring with trauma, every instinct telling him this was a mistake. Beside him, Lena gripped the armrest so tight her knuckles went white, and he realized she was just as terrified as he was. Maybe more so, given that she'd barely survived her own crash 2 weeks ago. The pilot, a weathered woman named Chen, glanced back at them. "You two okay?" "No," Lena said honestly, "but we're going anyway." Chen nodded like that made perfect sense and lifted off. The ground fell away beneath them, the facility shrinking to toy-sized proportions. The sun had set completely now, leaving only the last purple traces of twilight on the horizon. Below, the New Mexico desert stretched dark and empty, broken only by the scattered lights of distant towns. Evan closed his eyes and felt the familiar vibration of the rotors, the slight sway as the aircraft adjusted to wind currents, the peculiar floating sensation that used to feel like freedom. Now it just felt like falling. He forced his breathing to slow, counting seconds the way Sarah had taught him when he was still learning to fly. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. "You don't have to look," Lena said quietly. "At the crash site. When we get there. You can stay with the helicopter if you need to." Evan opened his eyes and found her watching him with concern. "I'll be fine." "You're shaking." "So are you." She managed a weak smile. "Fair point." Agent Torres sat across from them, coordinating with search and rescue over his headset. His expression grew grimmer with each transmission. Finally, he pulled off the headset and leaned forward. "Search and rescue found the wreckage. It's bad. The helicopter came down in a canyon, broke apart on impact. They're seeing debris scattered over a 1/4 mile. "Survivors?" Lena asked. "They don't know yet. It's dark and the terrain's treacherous. They're bringing in lights and rope teams, but it'll take time." "How many people were aboard?" Torres checked his notes. "Border Patrol manifest shows 4, pilot, co-pilot, and 2 agents." 4 people. 4 families who were about to receive the worst news of their lives. 4 more names to add to the list of victims Richard Hart had created. Evan saw the thought cross Lena's face, saw the guilt settle over her like a shroud, even though none of this was her fault. "We were so close," she whispered. "Another few hours and we would have grounded the fleet. They'd still be alive." "You can't think like that," Evan said. "This isn't on you." "Isn't it? I've known about the defect for 3 years. If I'd gone public sooner, if I'd found another way to prove it, your father would have buried you and the evidence both. You did everything you could." Evan reached over and took her hand. Sarah used to say that guilt is just love with nowhere to go. You can't save the people who are already gone, but you can save the ones who are still here. Lena's eyes filled with tears. What if we're too late for them too? Then we'll honor them by making sure it never happens again. But right now we focus on finding survivors, one thing at a time. The helicopter banked sharply, descending toward a cluster of lights in the darkness below. As they dropped lower, Evan could see the search and rescue operation taking shape. Emergency vehicles lined a dirt road at the canyon's edge, their headlights illuminating the rim. Portable floodlights were being set up, casting harsh white beams into the depths where the wreckage lay. Chen brought them down in a cleared area near the command post. They climbed out into controlled chaos, rescue workers shouting coordinates, radios crackling with updates, the roar of generators powering the lights. An incident commander in a yellow vest approached Torres immediately. FBI, good. We need all the help we can get. The wreckage is at the bottom of a 60-foot drop on unstable scree. We're rigging lines now, but it's going to be slow going in the dark. Any signs of life? Torres asked. We're picking up heat signatures, at least 2, maybe 3, but we can't tell if they're conscious or how badly they're injured. The helicopter's fuel tank ruptured on impact, so we've got fire risk if anything sparks. Lena stepped forward. I'm a pilot. I know the aircraft configuration. I can help identify safe access points and potential hazards. The commander looked skeptical. Ma'am, this is a professional rescue operation. We can't have civilians. She helped design safety protocols for Hart Aviation before she left the company, Torres lied smoothly. She's consulted on 3 previous crash investigations. Let her help. The commander studied Lena for a moment, then nodded. Fine, but you stay where I can see you and you follow orders. Clear? Clear. They moved to the canyon rim where rescue workers were setting up rappelling equipment. Evan looked down and his stomach lurched. The wreckage lay crumpled at the bottom, like a broken toy, barely visible in the floodlights. Pieces of the fuselage were scattered across the rocky slope, some still smoking. The tail section had separated completely and lay wedged between 2 boulders 30 feet from the main body. It looked exactly like Sarah's crash, exactly like the nightmares he'd been having for 10 years. Evan's vision tunneled, his chest tightened. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at the twisted metal and remember another crash site, another broken helicopter, another life destroyed by corporate negligence. Evan, Lena's hand on his arm, her voice cutting through the panic. Look at me, not down there, at me. He dragged his gaze away from the wreckage and focused on her face. She looked scared but determined, present in a way that anchored him. I can't. Yes, you can, because those people down there need help, and we're the only ones who understand exactly what went wrong. We know the aircraft. We know the defect. We can guide the rescue teams to the safest approach. I haven't been near a helicopter in 10 years. I know, and I crashed one 2 weeks ago. We're both terrified, but we're also the best chance those people have. She squeezed his arm. 4 counts in, remember? Evan forced himself to breathe. 4 counts in, hold for 4. 4 counts out. The panic receded slightly, enough for him to think. Lena was right. They knew things the rescue teams didn't. They could help. Okay, he said. Okay, what do you need me to do? Lena turned to the incident commander. The fuel tank on this model is located aft of the passenger compartment. If it ruptured on impact, there's fuel pooled somewhere in the wreckage. Any spark could ignite it. We're aware. Fire suppression team is standing by. Good. The heat signatures you're picking up, where are they in relation to the main fuselage? The commander checked a thermal imaging display. 2 signatures inside what's left of the passenger compartment, 1 near the cockpit. Possible 4th signature, but it's faint. Could be residual heat from the fire. Lena studied the image. The passenger compartment would have taken the worst of the impact. If anyone survived, they're probably trapped by debris. You'll need cutting equipment to extract them. Already being lowered. What about access points? Passenger doors are mid-fuselage, port and starboard. If the structure's compromised, those might be blocked. Your best bet is through the cockpit. The windshield would have shattered on impact, giving you direct access to the front cabin. Lena paused. But be careful. The stabilizer bracket that failed is part of the rotor mast assembly. If it's still attached, the whole thing could shift and crush anyone underneath. The commander relayed this information to the teams preparing to descend. Evan watched the rescue workers gear up, checking their equipment with practiced efficiency. 2 of them were already on lines, descending into the darkness, their headlamps cutting through the gloom. Minutes crawled by. Radio chatter provided updates in terse fragments. Reaching the wreckage now. Confirming multiple casualties. 1 survivor conscious, others unresponsive. Requesting medical pack drop. Then, we've got a problem. The rotor mast is unstable. It's partially detached and resting against the fuselage. Any movement could bring the whole assembly down. The incident commander swore under his breath. He looked at Lena. Options. She closed her eyes, visualizing the aircraft structure. The rotor mast weighs approximately 400 pounds with the blade still attached. If it's resting against the fuselage, you need to stabilize it before attempting extraction. Use straps to secure it to a fixed anchor point, preferably one of those boulders. Once it's secured, you can safely access the passenger compartment. That'll take time, and we've got at least 1 survivor who needs immediate medical attention. Then you work fast. But if that mast comes down on your people, you'll have 6 casualties instead of 4. The commander didn't argue. He relayed the instructions and the rescue teams went to work. Evan watched the operation unfold with a detached fascination, his pilots training parsing each action even as his emotions screamed at him to look away. Lena stood beside him, calling out advice when the teams encountered complications, her knowledge of the aircraft proving invaluable. 30 minutes later, the rotor mast was secured and the rescue teams began extraction. The first survivor came up on a litter, strapped down and barely moving. Paramedics swarmed immediately, starting IVs, checking vitals, loading the patient into an ambulance. The second survivor followed 10 minutes later, this one more responsive, crying out in pain as they lifted the litter over the canyon rim. 2 down, 2 to go, Torres murmured. But the radio transmission that came next made everyone freeze. Command, we've got a complication. 3rd survivor is trapped under the instrument panel. We can't move it without specialized cutting equipment, and we're running out of time. She's losing blood fast. The commander grabbed the radio. How much time? Minutes, not hours. We need that cutting equipment now or we're going to lose her. Evan felt Lena stiffen beside him. He knew what she was thinking because he was thinking it too. They'd spent 3 years fighting to expose the defect, 2 weeks running from Hart Aviation's lawyers, and now they were watching in real time as another person died because of Richard Hart's greed. There has to be something we can do, Lena said. The commander shook his head. The cutting equipment is being lowered now, but it's heavy and the slope is unstable. It's going to take time we don't have. Then we need another option. Is there any way to access her from a different angle? Through the tail section, maybe? Negative. The tail's too far from the passenger compartment, and the terrain between them is too dangerous to traverse in the dark. Lena's jaw set in a way Evan recognized. She was about to do something reckless. What if someone went down there? Someone who knows the aircraft well enough to manually dismantle the instrument panel without waiting for cutting equipment. You mean you? The commander's voice was flat. Absolutely not. You're injured and you're a civilian. I'm not sending you into an active rescue operation. You're not sending me, I'm volunteering. Lena turned to Torres. You said I was a consultant. Well, I'm consulting that the fastest way to save that woman's life is for me to go down there and get her out. Lena, no, Evan said. It's too dangerous. People said the same thing when I built that helicopter to prove the defect existed. I went anyway. She looked at him with eyes that were afraid but resolute. I started this fight to save lives, Evan. I'm not going to stand up here and watch someone die when I can help. Before anyone could stop her, Lena moved to the rappelling equipment and started putting on a harness. The rescue coordinator tried to intervene, but Torres stopped him with a hand on his arm. Let her go. She knows what she's doing. She's going to get herself killed. Maybe. But she's right about being the fastest option. And that woman down there doesn't have time for us to debate it. Evan watched Lena check her harness with shaking hands. Her broken leg was still in a walking cast, barely healed enough to support her weight, and now she was about to descend into a dark canyon to perform an emergency extraction on unstable terrain with a fuel leak that could ignite at any moment. It was insane. It was brave. It was exactly what Sarah would have done. He grabbed a harness. I'm going with you. Lena spun around. Evan, you haven't been on a line in 10 years. You don't have to. I know these aircraft too. I maintained Sarah's helicopter for 5 years. Between the two of us, we can get that panel off faster than you could alone. He started putting on the harness, forcing his hands to stop shaking. Besides, you're injured. You'll need someone to stabilize you on the descent. The incident commander looked like he wanted to argue, but another radio transmission cut him off. Command, survivor's pulse is weakening. We need help now. Go, the commander said to Evan and Lena. But you follow the rescue team's instructions exactly. And if I say abort, you abort. Clear? Clear, they said in unison. 2 rescue workers helped them onto the lines. Evan clipped in with muscle memory he thought he'd forgotten, his hands moving through the motions automatically. Beside him, Lena tested her weight on the rope, wincing as her injured leg took the strain. Last chance to back out, Evan said. Not a chance. They stepped backward off the rim together and dropped into darkness. The descent was terrifying. The canyon wall was loose scree that shifted under their feet with every step. Evan's headlamp illuminated a narrow cone of rock and shadow, the wreckage below still out of sight. His heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool night air. Every instinct screamed at him to climb back up, to get away from the crash site, to run. But Lena was beside him, moving carefully down the line with grim determination, and he couldn't let her do this alone. They reached the wreckage 10 minutes later. Up close, it was worse than Evan had imagined. The helicopter had hit nose first and crumpled like an accordion, the cockpit crushed almost flat. The passenger compartment was torn open on one side, exposing twisted seats and shattered equipment. Fuel pooled in dark puddles, its chemical smell sharp in the air. 2 rescue workers were already inside, working frantically to free the trapped survivor. One of them looked up as Evan and Lena approached. You the consultants? Yeah, Lena said. Where is she? Here. Instrument panel came down on impact and pinned her legs. We've got the bleeding controlled for now, but we can't move the panel without risking further injury. Lena climbed carefully into the wreckage, Evan right behind her. The survivor was a young woman, maybe 25, her border patrol uniform soaked with blood. She was conscious, but barely, her eyes unfocused with shock and pain. Hey, Lena said gently, kneeling beside her. My name's Lena. We're going to get you out of here. What's your name? Maria, the woman whispered. My legs. I can't feel my legs. That's okay. That's normal. We're going to move this panel very carefully and then get you to the hospital, but I need you to stay still for me. Can you do that? Maria nodded weakly. Lena turned to Evan. The panel is secured by 4 mounting bolts. If we can remove those, we can lift it straight up without lateral movement. Evan examined the wreckage. The instrument panel had torn free from the cockpit, but remained partially attached by wiring and hydraulic lines. We'll need to disconnect those lines first, or we'll damage them when we lift. Hydraulic lines first, Lena said. They're pressurized. If we cut them wrong, we could spray fluid all over the fuel. They worked together with focused intensity, Lena calling out instructions while Evan's hands moved through the familiar motions of aircraft disassembly. Disconnect the hydraulic lines. Cap them to prevent leaks. Trace the electrical wiring and cut it at safe junction points. Remove the mounting bolts one by one, each turn of the wrench bringing them closer to freedom. 15 minutes in, Evan's wrench slipped and struck metal. A spark flashed in the darkness. Everyone froze. The spark died without igniting the fuel vapors, but it was close enough to make Evan's blood run cold. One of the rescue workers exhaled shakily. Let's not do that again. Agreed, Evan said, his hands shaking harder now. He forced himself to focus, to slow down, to be more careful. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. Precision over speed, every time, no exceptions. 20 minutes later, the last bolt came free. Okay, Lena said to the rescue workers. On 3, we lift straight up. No twisting, no lateral movement. Ready? They positioned themselves around the panel. Lena counted down. 3, 2, 1, lift. The panel rose slowly, grudgingly, metal groaning against metal. Maria cried out as pressure released from her legs. Blood welled from wounds that had been compressed, and one of the rescue workers immediately applied pressure while the other prepared a tourniquet. We're clear, Lena announced. Get her on a litter now. They worked with practiced efficiency, stabilizing Maria's legs, securing her to the litter, preparing her for the difficult ascent. Evan helped guide the litter to the base of the rope system while Lena coordinated with the teams above. Within minutes, Maria was being raised toward the rim, the rescue workers accompanying her up the line. Evan and Lena stood in the wreckage, breathing hard, covered in blood and fuel and sweat. Around them, the broken helicopter creaked and settled. Above, stars filled the sky in impossible numbers, cold and distant and beautiful. "That's 3, Lena said quietly. 3 survivors, 1 more to go. But the radio transmission that crackled through the night air killed that hope. Command, 4th casualty is confirmed deceased, no vital signs, appears to have died on impact." Lena's shoulders sagged. Evan reached for her, but she pulled away, moving deeper into the wreckage toward where the rescue workers were covering the body with a tarp. She knelt beside it, her hand hovering over the tarp, but not quite touching. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry we didn't stop this sooner." Evan knelt beside her. "Lena, you can't—" His name was Marcus Rodriguez, 34 years old, married, 2 kids. She pulled out her phone and showed Evan the Border Patrol manifest she'd been reviewing earlier. Marcus's photo smiled up at them, a man with kind eyes and a proud uniform. "He died because my father valued money over safety. Because I took 3 years to find enough evidence to prove it. Because we were hours too late to ground the fleet." "No," Evan said firmly. "He died because Richard Hart made a choice to cover up a deadly defect. That's not on you. That's on the man who's sitting in federal custody right now waiting to face justice. Justice won't bring Marcus Rodriguez back. It won't give his kids their father. No, but it will prevent the next crash and the one after that. 3 people are alive right now because you built that helicopter, because you recovered that flight recorder, because you refused to stay silent even when it cost you everything." Evan took her hands. "You've been fighting for 3 years to save lives. Tonight, you saved 3 more. That matters, Lena. It matters." She looked at him with tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she was just a woman who'd carried too much weight for too long. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes, and became again the person who'd flown into a mountain to prove a truth that needed proving. "Let's get out of here," she said. They ascended the rope together, leaving the wreckage and the sorrow and the one life they couldn't save behind. At the top, paramedics rushed them to a medical tent to check for injuries. Evan had bruised ribs from the harness, and Lena had aggravated her leg injury, but they'd live. The 3 survivors were already en route to hospitals in Albuquerque, their conditions stabilized. Agent Torres found them sitting outside the tent, both too exhausted to move. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen civilians do." "Probably both," Lena said. "The survivors owe you their lives. All 3 were critical when you went down. Without your intervention, we'd be looking at 4 bodies instead of 1. Torres sat down beside them. "The incident commander wants to put you both in for commendations." "I don't want a commendation," Lena said quietly. "I want my father in prison where he can't kill anyone else." "He will be. The crash tonight is all the proof we need that this isn't ancient history. The NTSB's already opening an investigation, the FAA's grounding Hart Aviation's entire fleet effective immediately, and the Justice Department is adding manslaughter charges to the indictment. Richard Hart's empire is finished." Evan thought about the man in handcuffs, the corporate titan who'd built his fortune on the bodies of 73 people, about the families who'd been lied to, the investigators who'd been bribed, the safety protocols that had been ignored, about Sarah and Marcus Rodriguez, and all the others whose names were written in blood across Richard Hart's balance sheets. "Good," Evan said. "It's about damn time." They spent the night in a motel near the crash site, too tired to travel further. Evan took one room, Lena another, but at 3 a.m. he heard her crying through the thin walls and went to check on her. She opened the door with red eyes and a haunted expression. "Can't sleep," she said unnecessarily. "Me neither." She let him in. They sat on the edge of her bed in silence for a long time. 2 people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side changed. Finally, Lena spoke. "I keep thinking about Marcus Rodriguez's kids, about what it's going to be like for them growing up without their father, about the hole he'll leave in their lives." "I know." "Do you?" Really? Evan thought about Mia, growing up without Sarah, the way she'd sometimes stare at her mother's photo with an expression too old for her years. Yeah, I really do. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. It's okay. Evan took her hand. It doesn't get easier, but it does get different. The grief changes shape, becomes something you carry instead of something that crushes you. And eventually, you can breathe again without it feeling like betrayal. How long did that take you? About 10 years, give or take. He smiled sadly. But I had Mia to live for. She kept me going when I wanted to stop. Rodriguez's kids will have that too. Their mother, their family, their memories. It won't be enough, but it'll be something. Lena leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you. For coming tonight. For going into that wreckage when I know how hard it must have been. Thank you for reminding me why I used to love flying. Why Sarah and I believed aviation could make the world better. Evan kissed the top of her head without quite meaning to. You're remarkable, Lena Hart. She lifted her head and looked at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. They were close enough that he could count her eyelashes, see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, feel the warmth of her breath. Close enough that when she leaned forward, when her lips found his, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss was gentle, tentative, carrying the weight of everything they'd been through and everything they might still become. When they pulled apart, Lena was crying again, but these were different tears. I think I'm falling in love with you, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Good, Evan said, because I'm pretty sure I'm already there. And I'm terrified too. What do we do about it? I don't know, but maybe we figure it out together. She kissed him again, and this time it wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce and desperate and alive. Two people who'd stared death in the face and chosen to keep living anyway. They fell back onto the bed, still kissing, hands finding skin, breath mingling, the world narrowing to just this moment, this connection, this choice to be present and vulnerable and human. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, listening to each other breathe. Evan traced patterns on Lena's shoulder and thought about the future, about trials and testimony and the long process of bringing Richard Hart to justice, about rebuilding their lives from the ashes of everything they'd lost, about Mia and whether she'd accept Lena into their small family, about all the complicated, messy, beautiful possibilities that stretched ahead. What happens next? Lena asked, echoing his thoughts. We go back to Montana. You meet Mia properly, we help the FBI build their case, we watch your father stand trial. Evan paused. And then, if you want, you stay. We figure out what a life looks like when it's not defined by grief or guilt. When it's just life. Just life sounds pretty good right now. Yeah, Evan agreed. It really does. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two broken people finding wholeness in unexpected places. Outside, the desert night gave way slowly to dawn, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. And somewhere in Montana, a little girl waited for her father to come home, not knowing that when he did, he'd be bringing someone who would help them both remember how to hope again. The trial of Richard Hart began on a cold morning in February, almost exactly 11 years after Sarah Cole's helicopter fell from the sky. Evan sat in the gallery with Mia on one side and Lena on the other, watching as the man who'd built an empire on corporate negligence was led into federal court in handcuffs. Richard Hart looked older than he had that night in the desert, his silver hair now tinged with gray, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight he'd lost during 3 months in custody. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, scanning the courtroom for weaknesses to exploit. Those eyes found Lena and held for a moment. She stared back without flinching, and Evan felt her hand tighten around his. Mia, dressed in her best outfit at her own insistence, watched the proceedings with solemn attention. She'd asked to come, said she wanted to see justice for the mother she barely remembered, and Evan hadn't had the heart to say no. Is that him? Mia whispered. Mia, the bad man who hurt Mom? Yes, sweetheart, that's him. He doesn't look scary. The dangerous ones usually don't. The prosecution's opening statement laid out a case so damning that even Hart's expensive legal team seemed to deflate as the evidence mounted. The flight recorder data showing the stabilizer failure. Walter Benson's testimony about the bribes. The internal memos documenting Hart's knowledge of the defect. The 73 deaths spanning a decade, each one preventable, each one buried under layers of corporate deception. The prosecutor's voice never rose, never became theatrical. She simply presented facts, each one more devastating than the last, and let them speak for themselves. Hart's attorney tried to argue that his client had relied on engineers' assurances, that he couldn't have known the true extent of the problem, that the crashes were tragic accidents but not criminal acts. The argument might have worked if Lena hadn't spent 3 years building an ironclad case. Every claim the defense made, the prosecution countered with documentary evidence in Hart's own handwriting, emails where he explicitly acknowledged the defect and chose profit over safety. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Evan and Lena attended every day, becoming fixtures in the gallery alongside the families of the 73 victims. Some of those families recognized Evan and thanked him quietly for helping bring the truth to light. Others blamed him for not acting sooner, for not forcing Sarah to speak up before her crash. He accepted both responses with equal grace, understanding that grief made people need someone to direct their anger toward. Lena testified on the 8th day. She walked to the stand with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible despite her complicated relationship with faith, and swore to tell the truth. For 4 hours, she detailed her father's crimes with clinical precision, presenting emails, memos, and financial records that painted a picture of systematic corruption. Hart's attorney tried to rattle her during cross-examination, suggesting she was an unstable daughter seeking revenge on a father who'd loved her too much. "My father didn't love me," Lena said quietly. "He loved control. He loved money. He loved power. And when those things were threatened by the truth about his defective aircraft, he chose to protect them instead of the 73 people who died. That's not love. That's murder." The courtroom was silent. Hart's attorney had no response. Lena stepped down and returned to her seat beside Evan, who took her hand and held it while she shook with the aftermath of confronting the man who'd shaped her entire life. That night, back at the small apartment they'd rented in Denver for the duration of the trial, Lena collapsed onto the couch and cried for an hour straight. Evan held her, saying nothing, just being present while she purged years of pain and betrayal. Mia brought her a glass of water and a drawing she'd made of mountains and helicopters and 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's you and Dad and me," Mia explained, pointing to the figures. "After all the bad stuff is over and we can go home." Lena pulled the little girl into a fierce hug. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful. Do you think the judge will put the bad man in jail forever?" "I hope so." "Me too, because then we can all go fishing like you promised." The innocence of it broke something loose in Lena's chest. She laughed through her tears and promised that, yes, as soon as this was over, they would absolutely go fishing. Mia seemed satisfied with this answer and wandered off to watch television, leaving the adults to process the weight of everything that had been said in court. "She's remarkable," Lena said. "So much like Sarah. She gets that from her mother. The resilience, the optimism, the ability to see good in broken situations." Evan brushed a strand of hair from Lena's face. "But she's learning new things too, from you, how to stand up for what's right even when it's hard, how to turn pain into purpose. I don't know if I'm the best role model for a 9-year-old. You're exactly the role model she needs. Someone who shows her that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." Lena kissed him softly. "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher. She flew helicopters and believed people were fundamentally good, and died proving that some things are worth fighting for. I wish I could have known her." "I think in some ways you already do. She's in Mia's laugh and in the photos on my mantle, and in the reason we're all here fighting this battle." Evan pulled Lena closer, "and I think she'd be proud of what you've done, what we've done together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 people who'd found unexpected love in the midst of pursuing justice. The road ahead was still uncertain. Even if Hart was convicted, there would be appeals, civil lawsuits, the complex process of compensating victims' families. But for tonight, they had this moment of peace, and that was enough. The prosecution rested its case after 3 weeks. The defense tried to mount a counterargument, bringing in expert witnesses who claimed the crashes were unavoidable, that all aircraft had acceptable failure rates, that Hart Aviation had met or exceeded industry standards. But under cross-examination, every expert admitted they'd been paid substantial consulting fees by Hart Aviation. Every technical claim crumbled when confronted with the actual engineering data. By the end of the fourth week, even the defense seemed to realize they were fighting a losing battle. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Evan, Lena, and Mia spent those 48 hours in anxious limbo, unable to focus on anything except waiting. They took walks through Denver's streets, visited museums they barely saw, had conversations that circled endlessly back to the same questions. What if the jury couldn't reach a verdict? What if Hart's lawyers had found some technicality to exploit? What if justice failed the way it had for the past decade? On the morning of the third day, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed when they arrived, every seat filled with victims' families, journalists, aviation industry representatives, people whose lives had been touched by Richard Hart's crimes. The judge entered, called for order, and asked the foreman to read the verdict. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of bribery of federal officials, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. The foreman continued through 23 separate counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word landed like a hammer blow, each one another nail in the coffin of Richard Hart's empire. When the foreman reached the final count, involuntary manslaughter in the deaths of 73 people, there was a long pause. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. We find the defendant guilty. The room erupted. Some people cheered, others sobbed with relief. Still others sat in stunned silence as years of waiting for justice finally reached resolution. Evan felt Mia's small hand grip his tightly, and when he looked down, she had tears streaming down her face. "Does this mean Mom's name is cleared?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart, it does. Everyone knows now that she didn't make a mistake. She was a hero who died because someone else chose profit over safety." Mia nodded and wiped her eyes. "Good. I'm glad people know the truth." Beside them, Lena sat very still, her face unreadable. Evan put his arm around her and felt her trembling. "You okay?" "I don't know. I thought I'd feel triumphant or vindicated or something, but I just feel—" She paused, searching for the word. "Empty. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long that now that it's gone, I don't know who I am without it. You're someone who brought down a corrupt empire and saved countless lives. You're someone who chose truth over family loyalty. You're someone who—" Evan's voice caught. "Someone I love. Someone Mia loves. Someone who has a future that's not defined by your father's crimes." Lena looked at him with eyes full of complicated emotions. "What does that future look like?" "Whatever we want it to look like." The judge called for order and proceeded to sentencing. Given the severity and scope of the crimes, Richard Hart received 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. He would be 83 years old before he could even be considered for release. For a man who'd built his identity on power and control, it was a death sentence of a different kind. Hart stood to hear the sentence without visible emotion, but when he turned to leave the courtroom, his eyes found Lena one last time. She met his gaze steadily, and whatever he saw there made something in his expression crack. Just for a moment, he looked like a broken old man instead of a corporate titan. Then the marshals led him away, and he was gone. The media circus outside the courthouse was overwhelming. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward anyone connected to the case. Agent Torres shepherded Evan, Lena, and Mia through the crowd to a waiting car, but not before several victims' families stopped them to say thank you. An older woman whose son had died 7 years ago hugged Lena and sobbed against her shoulder. A man who'd lost his wife thanked Evan for not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away. By the time they reached the car, all three of them were emotionally wrung out. Torres drove them back to their apartment in silence, understanding they needed time to process. At the door, he paused before leaving. "The FAA's issued new regulations based on your testimony," he told Lena. "Mandatory inspection protocols for stabilizer assemblies, independent oversight of manufacturer maintenance guidelines, criminal penalties for executives who suppress safety data. They're calling it the Hart Prevention Act." That won't bring back the people who died. No, but it might save the ones who haven't died yet. That's something. After he left, Evan made dinner while Lena and Mia set the table. It was a simple meal, nothing fancy, but there was something profoundly normal about it that felt like healing. They ate together, the three of them, talking about everything except the trial. Mia told them about a book she was reading. Lena shared a funny story about learning to fish as a child. Evan described the first time he'd soloed a helicopter and how terrified and exhilarated he'd felt. After dinner, Mia went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. Evan and Lena cleaned the kitchen together, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd been through fire together and emerged on the other side. "What happens now?" Lena asked, echoing the question she'd asked that night in the motel. "Now we go home. Back to Montana. Back to the mountains and the quiet and the life we've been building." "And then?" Evan dried his hands and turned to face her. "Then we keep building. We figure out what comes next together. Maybe I start flying again, teaching people the right way, the safe way. Maybe you use your engineering knowledge to consult on aviation safety. Maybe we just focus on being happy and giving Mia a stable home and not fighting for survival every single day. That sounds too good to be true. Maybe it is. But maybe we've earned a little good after everything we've been through." Lena moved into his arms and rested her head against his chest. "I love you, Evan Cole. I don't know when it happened or how, but somewhere between the fire and the crash site and the courtroom, you became the person I can't imagine living without. I love you too, and I think Sarah would approve." "You think so?" "I know so. She always said that life was too short to waste on fear or regret, that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to keep living as fully as possible." Evan kissed the top of Lena's head. "So that's what we're going to do. We're going to live." They returned to Montana 3 days later. The drive back felt different than any trip Evan had made in the past decade. For years, these mountains had represented isolation and safety, a place to hide from a world that had taken too much. Now they represented home in a fuller sense, a place where new memories could be built alongside old ones, where grief and joy could coexist, where the future felt like possibility instead of threat. Mrs. Richardson had kept the cabin maintained during their absence, and when they pulled up, smoke was already rising from the chimney. She came out to greet them with a casserole and a tearful hug, saying she'd watched the verdict on television and was so proud of everything they'd accomplished. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Mia went back to school and proudly told her class that her mother had been a hero, and now everyone knew it. Evan started offering flight instruction to local pilots, rediscovering his love for aviation through teaching. And Lena began consulting work for a nonprofit aviation safety organization, using her expertise to prevent the kinds of tragedies her father had caused. On a Saturday morning in April, exactly 4 months after Richard Hart's conviction, Evan took Lena and Mia to the lake, where he'd promised they'd go fishing. The water was still cold from snowmelt, but the sun was warm and the sky was impossibly blue. Mia caught 3 fish and insisted on releasing all of them because they deserved to live free. Lena tangled her line twice and laughed each time instead of getting frustrated. And Evan sat on the dock watching these 2 people he loved and felt something he'd thought was lost forever, pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Dad," Mia said as they were packing up to leave, "can Lena live with us forever?" Evan looked at Lena, who'd frozen in the act of folding a blanket. "I don't know, sweetheart. That's a pretty big question. But I want her to. She makes you smile again, and she tells good bedtime stories, and she promised to teach me about helicopters when I'm older." "Those are all good reasons," Evan agreed. "What do you think, Lena? You interested in living with a 9-year-old who asks too many questions and her father who can't cook anything except breakfast?" Lena's eyes shimmered with tears. "I think that sounds perfect. Even with the early mornings and the mountain winters and the fact that the nearest Starbucks is 40 miles away? Especially because of those things." Lena set down the blanket and crossed to where Evan stood. "I spent my whole life in cities and boardrooms and places that looked impressive but felt empty. This," she gestured at the mountains, the lake, the simple beauty of the world around them. "This feels like home. You feel like home." Evan pulled a small box from his pocket. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. This moment, with Mia watching hopefully, and the mountains bearing witness, and the woman he loved standing before him with sunshine in her hair, felt exactly right. Lena Hart, I know we've only known each other for 4 months. I know it's fast and probably crazy, and there are 1,000 logical reasons to wait. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and the only thing I'm absolutely sure of is that I want to spend whatever time I have left making you as happy as you've made me. So, he opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small diamond. Will you marry me? Lena's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, yes, absolutely, yes. Mia cheered and launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their legs. We're going to be a real family. We already are, sweetheart, Evan said, pulling both of them into a hug. This just makes it official. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the cabin, with Agent Torres as Evan's best man and Mrs. Richardson as Lena's matron of honor. Mia served as flower girl and took her duties very seriously, scattering petals with intense concentration. The guest list was small, a handful of friends, some families from the trial who'd become allies in the fight for justice, Carlos Martinez, who'd traveled from New Mexico to witness the happiness that had grown from tragedy. The ceremony was simple. Evan wore his best suit, Lena wore a dress the color of mountain sky, and they exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Evan promised to love her through the nightmares and the hard days, to never let fear stop them from living fully, to build a future worthy of everyone they'd lost. Lena promised to choose truth over comfort, to be a partner in adventure and in peace, to love Mia as if she were her own. When the officiant pronounced them married, when Evan kissed his new wife while their daughter cheered and their friends applauded, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Not the ending of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter written in hope instead of grief. The reception lasted into the evening, with too much food and too much laughter, and Mia eventually falling asleep on Mrs. Richardson's lap, while the adults told stories. Torres pulled Evan aside at one point and handed him an envelope. This came through official channels yesterday, he said. I thought you should have it before it becomes public record. Evan opened the envelope and found a letter from the National Transportation Safety Board. It was brief and bureaucratic, but the content made his throat tighten with emotion. Based on new evidence and testimony from the Hart aviation trial, Sarah Cole's crash investigation had been officially reopened. Her death had been ruled the result of mechanical failure caused by manufacturer negligence. The pilot error finding was rescinded. Her record was cleared. She's officially exonerated, Torres said quietly. I thought you'd want to know. Evan couldn't speak. He just nodded and gripped the letter while tears ran down his face. Across the yard, Lena saw his expression and came to him immediately, reading the letter over his shoulder. She wrapped her arms around him and they stood together, holding each other while the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. She knows, Lena whispered. Wherever she is, Sarah knows the truth is finally out, and I think she's happy that you found love again. That Mia has a mother figure who will teach her to be strong and brave and true. I think so too, Evan managed. I really think so too. As the last guest departed and Mia was carried to bed still sleeping, Evan and Lena stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. The same stars that had watched over crashes and rescues, trials and triumphs, all the moments that had brought them to this point. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't crashed that day? Lena asked. If you hadn't run into the fire? Sometimes. But then I remember that some things are meant to happen exactly the way they do. You were meant to build that helicopter. I was meant to save you. We were meant to fight this battle together. Evan pulled her close. And we were meant to find each other in the wreckage and build something beautiful from the ashes. Something beautiful, Lena repeated. I like that. 6 months later, Lena and Evan stood before a crowd of journalists and aviation safety advocates to announce the formation of the Sarah Cole Aviation Safety Foundation. The nonprofit organization would provide independent oversight of aircraft manufacturers, advocate for stronger safety regulations, and support families affected by aviation accidents. It was funded partly by Lena's settlement from Hart Aviation's bankruptcy proceedings, and partly by donations from people who believed aviation could be both innovative and safe. Evan served as director of flight operations, using his decades of experience to develop training programs that emphasize safety over profit. Lena headed the engineering review division, applying her technical knowledge to identify potential defects before they could cause crashes. And together, they built an organization that honored Sarah's memory by ensuring her death, and the deaths of 72 others would not be in vain. The Foundation's first major success came a year after its founding, when their engineers identified a potential defect in a popular helicopter model's fuel system. Unlike Richard Hart, the manufacturer listened, issued an immediate recall, and implemented the recommended fixes. No one died. No families were destroyed. The system worked the way it was supposed to, and that felt like victory. Mia grew up surrounded by people who believed in truth and justice and the importance of standing up for what was right. She learned to fly when she turned 16, soloing under her father's instruction, and chose to study aerospace engineering in college so she could follow in Sarah and Lena's footsteps. She never forgot her biological mother, but she gained a second mother who showed her that family was built through choice and love, not just blood. Richard Hart died in federal prison 4 years into his sentence, a broken man who'd lost everything he'd spent his life building. Some people said it was fitting justice. Others said no punishment could truly balance the scales against 73 lives taken. Evan and Lena didn't attend his funeral. They were too busy living, too focused on the future to waste time mourning a man who'd refused to value human life over profit. On the 10th anniversary of Sarah's death, Evan, Lena, and Mia hiked to a ridge overlooking the valley where Sarah had crashed. They'd brought stones to build a cairn, a marker that would stand as testament to a life cut short and the justice that had finally been served. As they stacked the stones, Mia asked if they could say something, some words to honor the mother she barely remembered but whose legacy had shaped her entire life. Evan spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Sarah Cole believed in the goodness of people and the importance of truth. She died doing what she loved, and though her death was a tragedy, her life was a triumph. We honor her by continuing her work, by choosing courage over fear, by building a world that's safer for the people who come after us. Lena added her own words. I never knew Sarah, but I know the love she left behind. I see it in Evan's strength and Mia's compassion and the work we do every day at the Foundation. Her death brought me into this family, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Mia placed the final stone on the cairn. Mom, I don't remember much about you, but Dad says I have your smile and Lena says I have your determination. I hope wherever you are, you're proud of the family we've become and the good we're doing in your name. I love you. They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, 3 people bound by loss and love and the choice to turn tragedy into purpose. The cairn stood solid and permanent, a marker of memory and justice served. And as they walked back down the mountain toward home, toward the life they'd built together, Evan felt something settle in his chest. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of peace. He'd spent 10 years running from the pain of Sarah's death, hiding in the mountains, afraid to live fully because living meant risking loss. Then Lena had fallen from the sky and reminded him that some risks were worth taking, that some fights were worth fighting, that some loves were worth opening your heart for despite the fear. They'd fought an empire and won. They'd exposed corruption and brought a murderer to justice. They'd saved lives and built something meaningful from ashes and sorrow. And most importantly, they'd found each other and chosen to build a future together, proving that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive and love could flourish, and life could go on in ways more beautiful than grief had allowed them to imagine. As they reached the cabin, Mia ran ahead to start a fire, while Evan and Lena paused at the door. Inside, warmth and light waited. Outside, the mountains stood eternal. And between those two spaces, in the threshold between past and future, they kissed under the emerging stars and whispered promises to keep living, keep fighting, keep loving as fiercely and fully as Sarah Cole had taught them. The story that had begun with a helicopter exploding against a mountain had become a story about justice, redemption, and the unexpected ways love could heal even the deepest wounds. It was a story about choosing truth over comfort, about standing up to power, about the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because it was right. And it was a story, finally, about coming home, Not to a place, but to the people who made living feel like more than just survival. To the family built from fragments and fire, to the love that grew in unlikely soil, to the future that stretched bright and hopeful toward horizons they'd face together. That was enough. That was everything. That was the victory that mattered most.